So again, thank you for joining the Canadian Cybersecurity Network and Sentinel-1 to discuss how a single source of truth can be based on data produced by system operations, users' behavior, and the tools we leverage to monitor both. I have a pleasure today to have two incredible speakers. First one, Enza Alexander, Executive Vice President at ISA Cybersecurity. Enza has been in cybersecurity for 25 years and 5 years with ISA. And Matthew Balcer, Director of Solution Engineering at Sentinel-1. Matt has been with Sentinel-1 for 6 years and quite a long time in cybersecurity as well. Enza, I'll let you take it from here. And if you have any questions, I'll interrupt from time to time to maybe ask you guys the questions.
Thank you. And thank you very much for having me today. And I was going to wave when you said Matt's name, just so that we could confuse our participants just a touch as we get started. You know, I would be remiss not to say that this is a follow-on to a conversation that we had the pleasure of hosting a dozen or so industry specialists and leaders at an event just about a month ago, where Matt and I were able to really start to gather and foster information on how you, the people that are securing and managing environments, are really looking at voluminous data. And as we move from tools to data and what that transition, that transformation looks like. So I'm just going to get started with, of course, putting Matt on the spot, which is sometimes what I do best, and talk really as business leaders, Matt. We ask ourselves, how do we strategize and plan for the evolution of threat defense in the enterprise security and creating enterprise security resilience? Tools on their own are not enough today. Data on its own is too voluminous for us to manage. And real insights can only come from modern tools that can leverage AI, automation, and interpret today's massive quantities of data and other defense at speed. So, you know, how can we plan for threat defense and enterprise security in these environments, Matt?
Yeah, so you mentioned that conversation we had, Enza, with some of the leaders, and one of the people, and I hope she doesn't mind me mentioning this, but the director of cyber for the RCMP joined us in that conversation. And, you know, what she pointed out is the fact we probably all know, we're playing a losing game, right? We are not winning the cyber war. The hackers are definitely winning. You know, the evidence of that is Google, Microsoft today. You'll find out about their ongoing, almost month-long breach. And so, you know, we have to change the game. For so long, we're, you know, trying to play predictive defense, and, you know, it's impossible. You don't know what new tools a hacker is going to come up with. They have almost infinite resources to attack you, and their skill level is very high. So, you know, trying to predict what the offense might do is a losing game. And so we've developed tools that are built almost single purpose to stop. But we're failing there too. You know, some really great tools, and, you know, Sentinel-1 has I think a pretty good EDR, and we do a good job of stopping most attacks. But there's always something that might get through. So how do we deal with that? And I think you let it off, Enza, is that we have to be able to look at all of the data that comes in from systems, from those defense tools, from user behavior, you know, all of that data, have it correlated as we analyze it, which, you know, to your point, sort of creates a challenge, right? This data is extremely voluminous. So I think the direction, you know, we're going at Sentinel-1, and we're hoping that a lot of the industry goes now, is to give people a platform that puts that data all in one place. We've seen the SIM world. I think there was some weakness there in terms of just being able to, you know, take in all of the data, often due to resources and dollars and cents. Some data would end up on the floor, but we have to have all that data there, because, you know, we're no longer just defenders. We're moving from defenders and operators to be investigators, and I think that's how we're going to take at least the first steps to starting to pull the cord a little bit more to our side to win that war against the attackers.
Yeah, we almost look at it like pre-protection, right? You know, we look at threat hunting, we look at the amount of threat intelligence now that we are examining within our businesses. Two uniquely different, even though customers will, or people in general, or organizations will in general say from time to time, you know, threat intel, threat hunting. We see those two activities, right, Matt, as uniquely different. Obviously, threat intelligence is what we're gathering based on threat vectors, sectors that we operate within, and what is known. You know, threat hunting is all about the unknown and that pre-protection of, you know, what could the possible threats. And when we talk about the AI topic or machine learning, you know, where SentinelOne has done an awesome job, really, of saying, hey, we're going to embrace this new tech and we're going to continue to innovate. You know, Matt, what is the innovation budget at SentinelOne? Like, I don't even know the numbers. I bet you've got a whole bunch of zeros around it.
Above my pay grade is the answer to that. I wish I knew, but you're certainly right. You know, brain power is not exponential, right? You can't just say, okay, well, if we're shifting from this idea of data investigation as the primary foundation of our defense model, then, you know, we have to be able to treat that data. So the common thought is, well, you know, okay, if I have 10 analysts now, then I double that and maybe I can handle more data. Unfortunately, that's just not the way it works. And certainly the data volume is growing much faster than the availability of people who have expertise in, you know, security investigation, you call it threat hunting and those sort of things. I mean, you're certainly not going to go to an employment page and find a list of people looking for jobs that have that level of expertise. So I think that's where AI plays in. And it can't just be a matter of taking ChatGPT and slapping it in front of your solution. We've definitely seen that. AI has been a buzz. It's kind of like the space race. Whoever can come up with the first real deal, viable AI solution is supposed to win everything. And I think we looked at the problem differently. It wasn't about winning the arms race. It was about looking at the problem and making sure we could solve it with something that was purpose-built. And, you know, so if you're going to think of something that takes security data, you need to be able to ask it security questions. And when you don't ask a security question, it needs to tell you that that wasn't a security question. And it needs to be able to compute data with security context. You talked a little bit about the difference between threat intelligence and threat hunting. You know, threat intelligence is contextual data that may help you in threat hunting, but certainly going through, you know, threat intelligence is not going to tell you whether you have an issue in your environment or not. It might provide you models that you can apply to the data in your environment, but it's certainly not going to tell you where the problem is. So if you can take that, add that context into the AI, and then put it in front of the data, and then train the LLMs or the models to understand security, then you're taking steps towards it helping you in investigation. So I think that's where we saw the solution is. It's not just about being the first to come out and say we've got AI, you know, someone else can win that war, but we wanted to make sure that we had the first one that works in a security context.
Well, for sure, Matt, we've coined the AI.
Yeah.
So I like that because we've given it its own personality now. I think we've turned it into a verb or something. But it is very exciting to watch SentinelOne evolve and adapt to these new innovations, to this new technology. Obviously, we're heavily invested at ISA Cybersecurity with SentinelOne. We've had the pleasure of being one of your top partners in the Americas for 2 consecutive years. And we continue to look at how your solutions, I'm not going to call them tools, but your approach, right? Because of course we're moving from tools to data, can really help customers accelerate what they're working on in that, what we'll call, you know, pre-protection, EDR, MDR, but more importantly, as we move beyond that, to looking at all of this unstructured data. Often we hear today that data is the utility or the resource. In the century in which we're now, in the decade which we're now all operating in, I think that's true. The challenge becomes for us, not just as individuals and people, but within our own organizations, to be able to identify how we are protecting that information. We're quite fortunate in Canada to have strict privacy laws. And it was really exciting, I think, for Matt and I to sit amongst some of the industry leaders just a month ago to understand how you're embracing some of this innovation, these new platforms, and more importantly, the lack of policy or controls as we see them today when it comes to AI. So you heard Matt talk about ChatGPT, some of the other technologies that are available. You're one click away, you're one voice bit away. The reality is, when it's out there, it's there. And so, we're looking at data so that we can help organizations understand if data is going to grow by 30% year over year, and those are the numbers we're looking at. So now look at the cumulative effect of that. It does sometimes feel that it is a bit of a losing battle where things are growing faster than we can wrap our arms around them. But I think organizations, like SentinelOne, have put data at the core of what you're doing, right, Matt? So tell us a little bit how you're looking at that whole voluminous data and, how we can identify what's important and how we can organize it.
Yeah, on that note, I thought, I'd share this one slide. Hopefully we won't bore you to death with a whole slideshow or anything. That's not the point of today, but the answer is the data comes from everywhere, right? And when we look at, the data sources, it used to be, okay, well, I want my firewall logs, I want my antivirus logs, I want my DLP logs, and you would try and push those all into the SIM. But what about the developers? Are they producing secure code? Are they, using security by design when they build up their infrastructure? Their infrastructure grows faster than any other environment, that we, operate. Right? They could be pushing out containers that last 5 minutes. Are they looking at all the ways that security should be monitored there? And so the answer is, data is coming from a lot of places. So that brings up I think the second part to your question is, how do we organize this so it's workable? And, I think that the problem there is, up until pretty recently, there was really no standards to data, even specifically security data. So, we would use, all kinds of log formats over syslog or APIs or any other source to ingest the data. And frankly, you could do something like if you were trying to look for something that a specific user did, and you put in username equals M Balcer. Well, maybe the nomenclature used by one of the tools you have in place doesn't use username. They use uname or user or any other format to identify the person logging in or whatnot. So that presented a pretty significant challenge. Now, again, the better of the SIM platforms out there came up with either ways to correlate and normalize that data, or they came up with their own proprietary, sort of language to normalize that, which may or may not have created a secondary problem, because now if I'm an investigator in your environment, I need to learn that language. I need to understand why it was normalized, and is everything normalized. So thankfully, the good news is most vendors are now going to normalize on the OCSF, which is going to become the standard for logging for at least for security tools. Now, for the other log sources, we they're still work in progress, I think. But for the most part, all of the tooling should now standardize on this one format of logs, which means it'll be a lot easier to correlate, which means, knowing that this volume will increase significantly, normalization of that data becomes important to even give us a starting point for investigation. So, I think we understand the problem. You're right, Enza, Sentinel-1, a few years back made an acquisition because we knew that data was going to become, so we wanted to set our foundation as a data lake and build on top of it, let the tools sit on top of that. Because, although we don't want to be pushing tools, we want to be, the whole topic is to say we're pushing solutions, but, the tools they're an important piece. They're just not that single source of defense that they maybe once were. So normalization of data, ability to ingest large amounts of data. I mentioned it a bit earlier that, maybe the biggest downfall of SIMS is that, that there was some, amount of data that always got left out or was considered secondary. The new type of investigations don't allow for that. I need to have full visibility. So standardization, normalization of data, ability to ingest large volumes, and with that, an ability to investigate large volumes with ease is going to be key going forward.
Quick question here, if it's possible, from Elizabeth.
Go ahead.
Do we believe that the tooling is going to hold up to the new data paradigm? It's an interesting question. Matthew, what do you think?
Yeah, so that is the challenge, right? And I think we've sort of touched on it. Is will the platforms we're building stand up if the data continues to grow at this exponential rate? Because again, if it's not useful, if I can't compute that data, then what's the point of having the platform? So if the platforms are going to reach their end, then we need to think about the design different. And so I can only speak for Sentinel-1. I haven't built other platforms or been involved in other platforms. Ours is absolutely built for almost infinite exponential growth. We saw that as a key element of the problem early on. One of the main feedbacks we got from customers is, had an incident, wanted to investigate it, wanted to get back to a point of resilience. We were missing elements. There was data that was lost. There was data that was never, correlated with, the problem. So our platform certainly is built for that. And I think, what then becomes the weakest link is us as human beings, right? We will have trouble computing the large amounts of data, which is what circles us back to what we've been tiptoeing around thus far, which is the solution to that is certainly the AI assistance.
Yeah, I think, Elizabeth, you bring up a good point. You've also put in, and thank you for chatting with us. We wanted this to be an open forum. Please jump in. Your thoughts, your ideas are equally as important, if not even more important, than what Matt and I and our technical teams get an opportunity to discuss on an ongoing basis. The compute and storage platforms are not built for this, I think, is a very fair comment. The reality is that we might be able to ingest data. Of course, we're creating controls and policies and standards. So we almost have to know what we're looking for, and it's at our detection layer. And is that too late? Now the challenge I have is that I'm storing all this data, and if I'm storing unstructured data, what's my cost? Because there are business implications to that growth in that cost of storing, whether you're on-prem or in the cloud or a hybrid of both. And so, Matt, you said it well. Certain platforms have been born organically with data at the core. I think those organizations like Sentinel-1 are building data lakes that enable us to get access, to put data in and to pull data out, and to minimize those constraints. Also, from a technology perspective, you know, the platforms are one piece of, and I'm going to sound a little cliche, but people, process, and technology, right? So think of the tooling or those technologies as being a critical aspect, but we need to change how we skill our people to handle, you know, in the new environments. We're training people. I think somebody said, Lynn, you said, education is foundational. Absolutely. We need to learn, and as things grow, right, how we're handling them. And we need to not change our processes, but definitely be in tune of how can we take into consideration the constraints that we have in this world that we're building today. We know that the data is not going to get smaller. We know we need quick access to it. Like Matt just said, in an investigation, I want it 5 minutes ago. I don't want it 5 minutes from now. And don't tell me that I have too much that I can't search it, because now my whole cyber program is confusing, right? Because I need to be able to get to that data. And I think SentinelOne's done a great job of putting those pieces in play. So thank you for that question. Data comes in too fast, Matt, for humans to be able to respond. I think there's more than just data that sometimes comes in too fast for humans to respond. But of course, that's the topic for today.
Yeah.
How do we automate and streamline data analysis from, you know, your perspective?
Yeah. So, you know, I think there's two parts. We just touched on the architecture, right? You've got to be able to bring the data in. It's got to be organized in such a way that we can even start. You know, there can't be an end to the volume of data that we can ingest, and that all circles back to architecture. But, you know, I think in that sense, you know, there's a certain amount of automation that has to play into this. You know, as the data comes in, it should be treated in a certain way so that if you are pairing it, I'll give the example. Let's say you had firewall logs coming in, let's say you had VPN logs coming in, and let's say you had identity logs coming in. And you're pairing that with something that's happening in the world that we're most familiar with around EDR. Well, out of the gate, I wouldn't want to have to decide what parts of those data coming in from those other solutions are related to an alert I get in the EDR. All of that part can and should be automated. When I open up that EDR alert, it should say right next to it, by the way, on this system, we saw some irregular network traffic. On this system, we saw some irregular login details from, you know, whatever the login solution might be, or MFA solution might be, you know, VPN overprivilege or what have you. So you need to have that part taken care of out of the gate. That should not be decisions human beings are waiting and analyzing to make. Then once you have that large data lake of you know, security and system data, that part, you know, again, we've seen the world of SIM and SOAR and playbooks. You know, if you have the manpower, the skill, and everything else to do that, it has provided some more of that automation. We've seen some, you know, pretty strong MSSP and you know, service providers do really good jobs. I mean, I'd be remiss to say that ISA isn't definitely one of those. You guys have been able to set up environments and provide some of that automation. And then the third part of it is, you know, again, we'll circle back to this AI, and well, again, I'll share a little something. You know, so you know, again, I certainly don't see, and I don't think SentinelOne sees AI as a replacement for SOC workers, for security professionals, for, you know, really skilled MSSP service providers. It's to give everyone, you know, a fighting chance, to give everyone a lot of help, right? You know, help guide your security operations, automate analysis of alerts and events, so that when I click on, you know, a piece of telemetry or an event out of a log, I don't have to guess what the context of that is, or have a high level of knowledge that, you know, that event means this. that again can all be, AI can be used to do that. They can correlate the events for you. They can tell you what it is. And even down to the point of, sometimes we see breaches and it's a matter of, well, you had a bunch of great security tools in place, but half of them were misconfigured or not optimally configured. Again, sure, you can have a lot of help there from service providers, but again, the AI doesn't make human mistakes. Yeah, sure, there's false positives and things like that, but for the most part, it's pretty foolproof when you can say, hey, this is the best practice. When you see configurations that don't match that, make recommendations and things like that. So AI is going to go beyond just the transfer of asking questions in normal plain language and getting a threat hunting query produced from that. It's going to give benefit beyond that, and that's certainly a huge benefit, but then also adding in the other pieces like being able to automate analysis of events, being able to automate configuration assistance and things like that. So I think that's how certainly how and I think us at SentinelOne see the AI and how we can possibly deal with the large amounts of data in the most constructive way possible.
Well said, well said. I think it's Elizabeth that was asking us how we're going to recycle data. Did I get that right in the chat? We're just going to throw it out and put it in the compost, Elizabeth, because there's so much of it. We're not really sure what to do, but yeah, it would be interesting for sure to understand. Not sure if we understand the question, Matt. What do you think?
Yeah, so the way I see, at least I think the way I understand the question is, right, we've always learned from the past, right? Most of the behavior models that we use in detection, we can call them AI, we can call them ML or whatever, but for the most part, it's taking known types of data and reusing it. And the other piece is, how do we parse data? So I think I'm seeing that in your question too, Elizabeth, is how do we make sure that we're not just repeatedly ingesting the same data over and over again? Because that again has been a problem in the past, where we end up with this bulk of data and most of it is the same event 1,000 times through different solutions. Again, I think the normalization of data will help there. I think being able to have more intelligence in the parsers and right at the ingestion point to say this event and this event, one came from the EDR agent, one came from potentially like a Windows security log. Well, it's the same thing. Drop one or keep one, but understand that they're the same, so that when I do go into a hunt, that I'm not wasting my time trying to compare two identical events. I think where we ran into challenges in the past was the concept of indexing data, because it allowed the solution providers back when, and even today, to just charge you more because, well, everything has to be indexed, and how could we possibly know what's the same? Well, there are ways. So our solution is indexless, and I think just being able to understand the data and parse it and correlate and treat it properly from the single point where it comes from is how you sort of help with that.
Yeah, and I think, when we talk about the whole defense landscape that you're looking to build within your organizations, what's really important is that you understand where the data is coming from and what data is monumentally important and which you can access from systems internally. Because of course we know that we're not just the cyber professionals in our organizations, but we've got our IT professionals that are managing traditional technology requirements for our business. It's really important that we pull into our cyber defense systems, though that information, like Matt just described, that helps us make decisions, current, investigation, or future. But if we're putting all of this data into our defense systems, we are going to have too much data for us to be able to look at, or repetition of data, so that even when we're running investigations on that information, let's not even call it data any longer, we will have a considerable amount of time delay, of course. And I think Sentinel-1 has done a really good job. Matt spoke about the indexing in being able to say, hey, I get it. Give me the data, and we can look at it, whether or not we've put it into the right area, because it becomes part of the information that we need to be looking at on a consistent basis. Also, I think, Matt, you guys have created a good way to access data quickly within those environments in your overall, data at the core. What role do you think that AI, I'm going to go back to the AI for just a second, and please join in, our audience. We'd love to hear from you. What role will AI and machine learning play in the analysis at the detection and response layer? Now, you touched on that already, right, Matt?
Yeah.
You've sort of said, okay, we've got all this data, but specifically, in the detection, which you've already described, you've sort of covered that, but what about response?
Yes. So, I think where AI will play in that realm is, well, it does start with the detection, right? So I need to understand that there is a problem. And I think when we understand a problem, the response is easy enough, right? Sentinel-1, we've always been, for us, the R and EDR was always capitalized, right? We had remediation and rollback and all this, these features of our tool. But now when we look at this as the data problem, the response is no different. And I think where we saw AI helping is, and I'll give you a specific example on a true life story. So about a year ago, maybe 2 years, at this point, or no, about a year and a bit ago, we're sitting at our sales kickoff, and my phone starts to blow up. What I didn't know is that some intelligence had come out that a war was breaking out in Russia and Ukraine. And within minutes, our actual head of threat operations was on stage explaining to us all the different fun and less fun things that were going on from a cyber perspective. But what I was receiving was text messages and emails from customers, very concerned. What does this mean for us? Is there a way that I can start investigating my environment to find out, do I have systems that are connected to vendors, operators, whatever, out of Russia or the Ukraine? And so I'm sitting there in the middle of this presentation and going, oh my gosh, like I've got to start to think about queries and hunting methodology and all of these things. And, not very easy, and miss a period, miss a question mark, miss a parentheses, miss a whatever, and my query won't work and will frustrate operators and not allow them to continue. So, I eventually, working with some of my peers and everything, we came up with some queries to look for GeoIP and other things. So fast forward 8 months, and I'm sitting in front of the Canadian Cybersecurity, some people from Canadian Cybersecurity of the government, and they said, well, Matt, if we had this problem today, how would Purple AI, Sentinel-1's AI, how would it help? I said, I would walk up to it and just ask it, show me all the systems that are currently connected to Russia. It'll then give me a list of systems that are connecting to Russia at a frequency. It'll then suggest a second question to say, hey, you should ask what applications are those systems, within those systems are creating those connections, and so on and so on. And it essentially just runs through a full investigation from me just asking that one first question, show me the systems that are making connections to Russia. Now comes the response part. Well, I've got all this data, I've got questions, I've got, queries that now lead me to understand where I might have some risk. Well, how do I plug that hole? How do I plug that risk? Well, you've got to automate that part too. We have something called star rules, which means I can take any one of those queries, any one of those questions, and turn it into a detection model. From that model, I can then decide what my responses will be. Will it be, disconnecting users? Will it be, resetting passwords? Will it be, rolling back the system? There's a bunch of responses I can then put in place. But the first part was the hard part, is how do I detect all this and, have it in a language that anyone can do? Once we have the responses built in, then it's just a matter of having them trigger on that query. So that was a real life problem. And today, if someone asks me now, I don't have to think as hard. I just put it into purple and let purple do the work.
We'll just call it curious AI, where it just keeps asking you more and more questions until you've actually identified the right information that you need to gain out of it.
Right.
Sort of moving on to the more strategic side. I mean, we've talked a little bit tactically here, but what are some of the strategies, Matt, that can be employed or deployed by our customers to identify and prioritize critical data amidst, this overwhelming volume of information that we're looking at?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to that first image I showed with all the different sources of data. I think it takes, a collaboration within the teams of any organization to sit at the table and say, what are you guys doing? What logs is that producing? What data is that producing? And the important piece there is to not forget anybody, because, someone, doing rogue IT or doing some project might be producing something that at some point gives you data to help you in an investigation or defense. So it's to get everybody at the table. So that's strategically, I think the first point is to identify that everybody has an important role in this. I pointed out the guys from DevOps, the guys building applications, the guys, every user. So, even having people from HR come and sit at that meeting and say, hey, yeah, this is what my users do. And so having everybody play that role, understanding the data. And then once you have that list of data sources, and it could be a long one, should be a long one, is identifying what is a priority. Now, the exercise is different, I think, than the one we used to do, which is, I'm going to take my top 10. That's what I can put into my data platform, because otherwise, I can't pay the bill and I don't have enough people to analyze it. It's making sure that priority is kept as sort of the foundation of the playbook. It's not only the data you're going to ingest, but when you go into the firefight, know that, okay, if I look at the logs and the data sources from here, these are the ones that sort of make more sense to me in terms of what I need to be looking at to identify the specific source of the initial attack, et cetera, et cetera. So, identifying the data, prioritizing the data, and then making sure you have that platform that can take it all in. So looking at evaluating the different platforms is, is SentinelOne's data platform right for you? Is somebody else's data platform right for you? There's lots of answers out there. We hope we're the answer, of course, because, but there might be different types of data platforms for different organizations, but it's to make sure that you identify the right one. And then, I definitely think that, remove the buzz from it, but tactically, strategically, operationally, how are you going to use AI to, make all of this work, right? You don't have to use every form of AI. It's not the single answer for everything, but how can we strategically insert certain AI-based, tooling or solutions in place on top of the data, on top of what we normally do to make us better? Because again, it's not about replacing humans. It's how do I make the humans better using some of the AI that's out there. So, that's strategically, I think it's having those conversations, making sure that those pieces are part of the conversation going forward.
Yeah, I like that, Matt. Understanding our crown jewels, understanding what our ability as businesses to not have access to those systems and that information, which of course could be a cause of a breach. And really looking at ranking not just the top 10, like Matt said, but taking a view of, these systems, these applications, these processes, technology processes will interfere with our business, will interfere with our customers, can create outage that we can't afford to have. We hear about it, right? We wake up, we see someone on the news. And so I think it's understanding those crown jewels and understanding where that critical data. And I love what you said, Matt, about getting the stakeholders involved. You mentioned HR, but there are V and C level executives in our organizations that are making decisions to some of the tool sets that are being that are helping us run our businesses. The reality is that we need to understand what our tolerance of not having that data or that information in our business and for how long. Now we've identified a strategic ranking for those systems, for that data. And then let's layer on compliance and privacy. We are very fortunate to live in a country that has good privacy laws that protect us as people who live here, people who work here. And so what's really important is that, we now layer on the regulatory and the compliance requirements that we need. Because if we breach those privacy commitments that we have, never mind the new bills that are right in front of us, C26, C27, that are going to hold some of us accountable for that data and that information being released, it's critically important to understand how does regulatory, privacy, and crown jewels work together for me to understand where my strategic data is and how to protect it in that defense layer. So thank you for that, Matt. I can't believe that all you guys out there don't want to jump into this conversation and ask Matt, at least, a mind-boggling type question that may stump him. Although I've known him for a few years and I have been able to stump him. I'll just throw that out there. So again, please jump in. Matt, what are some of the thoughts that you have that you may want our audience or myself to think about?
Yeah, well, I think we've talked about the data, we've talked about AI, but you bring up an interesting point about compliance, and yes, certainly compliance around organizational data, enterprise data, user data, employee data, customer data, all those things, very important. But I think as we, roll into this world where data will rule security, there's going to be, I think, an important emphasis put on the security and compliance of that data. And one of the things that I really want people to start thinking about is, I could go at end about security AI and the way we've built it. And yes, we protect the data. And yes, we do not allow it to learn on specific customer data and things like that. And, we don't allow, data poisoning or data crossover. So when I'm searching data, it's not like I see anybody else's data from any other organization. So I think we really need to look about the solutions we're building, certainly around AI, because I think it's been a major missing component. Like you think about like the New York Times trying to sue the guys at OpenAI because they don't think that ChatGPT should be able to search their proprietary data. And then they're not sure that once it's in that tool or once it's searched by that tool, that their data is secured or can't be manipulated and all these things. So, I think as we go forward, any organization building in that world of AI and certainly around security tools, I think really have to think about that part of it is how do I keep the data secure? How do I find a compliant way to make that data available to the AI without it being intrusive? And also, I think we need to start thinking about the guardrails around AI too. Like, when again at that lunch, we were talking with one of the gentlemen who runs a school board, and he said, for me, it's, well, when a teacher asks the AI a question, I expect it to come up with a certain type of answer. But if a student asks the same question, should it come up with the same answer? One is a 6-year-old, one is a 30-year-old educator. They can't like the answers, the books that they read wouldn't be the same. Why would the answer coming from an AI be the same? So do we start to identify operators? And I put that in security context. Do I want someone who's maybe a first-year SOC analyst? When they ask a question, do they get the same answer that someone who's 20 years in the security business as a SOC analyst? Did they expect the same answer? Will they ask the same type of question? So I think, we're still evolving this, to a large extent, but those are the things I start to think about.
Yeah, I thought you were going to tell the magical story about, not going to take less than 2 minutes and share this, but we did have a senior exec from one of our educational boards, and it was interesting how obviously in school AI is frowned upon to do your homework. And should it be detected that you have used any form of AI, and thanks so much for your questions, we're going to get to those in just a second. If you use any form of AI, you will get a 0. You will fail that assignment. Well, the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree. So one of Matt's children actually received, a bad mark because the teacher had assumed that they had used AI to do their homework. At the end of the day, Matt's child had not used AI to do their homework. Matt was able to prove it because he's a subject matter specialist in this area. And so his child did get full marks. But it's interesting, what was interesting to me in that story was that, there are certain use cases or adaptation of AI, which is not okay today. And, we see that in our elementary schools, and we see us all struggling, I think, on, how we can take AI into our businesses in a safe way. And Matt, you said some really neat things there. You said, we don't allow it to learn based on, poisoning, and there's guardrails. And I think SentinelOne did put together, a strategy, a design that would take into consideration the possibilities of this technology. What I also like that you really mentioned was, it's not here to replace humans, right? Think about the human brain taking all of this data and this information and being able to add an element to it that is definitely needed. There are some naysayers that say that maybe AI will replace some of the information or intelligence worker. I think Matt and I both agree it will augment our capability so that we are looking at things that are strategic, right? Let's go to your questions because there's quite a few of them here. Thank you for jumping in and sharing. Oh, I think I was told not to worry about navigating the questions.
Yeah, don't worry about that. Let me help you there. So there's a question. I think we're kind of moving away from traditional cybersecurity, and we're moving to how to teach teachers how to navigate AI. I'm not sure if it's fully part of this conversation, but the question is, and I think we can take it to cyber back, is there a strategy that teachers can use to fully decipher whatever a student is using AI? And I think it's a good question. And let's kind of move it to cyber. If somebody sends you a report, if somebody sends you a picture of them, if somebody's getting hired, how do you know this information you receive is authentic?
Yeah, so the way we've done it from a security perspective is, all that the AI can do is look at the data that exists, the true data, the actual logs, and take a question or an investigation that the analyst is asking, and ask it against that data. And what it actually does is it creates the query that you would normally use in that security context, or the investigation in that security context, and it takes it from that plain language and puts it into the operational data language. So there's in our world, there's no false positive from the AI there, right? The only thing that it could do is maybe misinterpret the question. But then we've also put in ways where you can sort of gut check it. You can say, you know what, I asked that question, this is the query and this is the data you gave me, you missed it. So I'm going to re-ask the question and I'm going to mark that you got it wrong this time so that the AI doesn't just take the question and re-give you that same query. So for us, the issue of false positives or creating false narratives is sort of not there, because you always get from the, here's the plain language question I asked, here's the investigation it launched, here's the evidence. So you actually get this in what we call a notebook or a workbook around the investigation. So you get to follow it. So there's no falsification or misleading the guidance or the information there.
Thank you, Matt.
That's how we handle that piece.
Yeah, we have another, you have time for another question.
Sure.
And there's a question about AI governance. And
Yeah.
basically the question is like, are people doing this? Is your company doing this already? And what do you guys, I guess, recommend to other companies as well?
I think it's the baseline, right? You know, to Enza's point, we had the funny stories about students getting caught with this and all these other things because there are no guardrails, there are no governance. In our world, the way we use it is we've put in that governance from day one. You know, I already mentioned it, right? I don't want when Matt puts in a question for Sentinel-1 and starts in and investigation into Sentinel-1, it starts pulling data from other sources or other customers or anything like that. So we have absolutely put in those guardrails. It's actually part of what we talk about. The ML is not trained on open behavior models from all customer data or anything like that. We purpose train it, then we put it in front of your data, and your data stays separate, as it always has been, from everybody else's. So you know, we can't create worldwide governance on AI, but we can certainly control the way that our tool was built and govern that. And so that's the steps we've taken. But yeah, I hope there becomes standards where everybody has to do the same.
I think I'll add from myself, and I know as I want to add as well, is the same. You create policies for browsing, using your laptop. You need to have a policy about AI, use ChatGPT, and if you don't have them, then you need to talk to your CISO, or in some cases, talk to a privacy officer as well to understand this part as well, because while privacy is kind of separate than security, we do see they need to talk more together. And I know, Enza, you wanted to add something as well here.
I think you're a mind reader, because what you just said is exactly what I was going to convey. You know, we talk about guardrails, and thank you, Vivian. Absolutely. You know, we need to know. You're saying that we need to know, and thank you, Elizabeth, for your feedback as well, and Lynn for the ethics. But the reality is that you need a minimum of a guideline. You know, we may or may not be ready to issue AI policies, but terms of use are so critical to making sure that me, as an individual that works in my organization, is protecting what I think might not be a problem for the organization that I work in. You know, I can't put data. I need to know what I don't know. And so these guidelines and these policies and employees being trained on them, people, stakeholders in our businesses understanding them, will help us make sure that until we are completely AI ready, because not many of us are today, we can manage information, data, privacy, compliance, and maintain ethics.
Thank you. Enza, Matthew, thank you very much. Very incredible conversation today. A lot of knowledge. Thank you for everybody that joined us today. This episode is definitely recorded. So if you missed this today, please share it to your friends. Jess, can you please put the link to YouTube channel where it's going to be posted, and we definitely can circulate it later on. I think both of you companies doing an amazing job. I definitely met the ISA folks for a long time, and I know how credible you are. And I definitely work with Sentinel-1 for a long time. So I really like what you guys been doing. People ask a lot of good questions today, so they were listening. And it's always nice not to talk to just between yourself, but also get feedback from the audience. From other stuff from Canadian Cybersecurity Network, there's events every month. There's actually going to be an event in April 25th, where we'll talk about, I forgot what we're talking about, actually. I'll get it in a second. But meanwhile, thank you very much.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate your time and let us know if you need anything else from us.
Yeah,
Awesome.
thanks a lot.
Great. We're actually going to be talking about professional development at York University November 25th. Thank you. I
just want to say there are some questions that we may or may not have addressed. There are some coming in right now. We'll make sure that we get answers out to all of you.
So maybe before we leave, can both of you share what's the best way to find you in case people have questions, if it is LinkedIn or any other way? I'm sure you want to share your phone number that people call you during the night and ask you the questions.
Yeah, I'll give the phone to my husband so that he can answer. That'll go over really well. Enza Alexander at e-isa. Why don't we just put them in the chat, Matt, where the people can reach us, okay? And then, of course, on LinkedIn, you'll be able to find Matt and myself. We're interchangeable. Matt's an awesome guy. I can get to him or he can get to me. So please reach out to us. Let's continue the conversation. We're not going to solve the AI curve and the voluminous data issue that we're dealing with without the helps of the collaboration of all of you.
Thank you, everyone. Have an awesome Wednesday.